Hey, everybody, welcome to this special episode of the X Podcast. How are my friends doing, Tim and Russ?
Good.
You threatened to start your own.
He did.
You guys weren't here. I was going to start
we
my own
almost got
podcast.
fired before this episode.
The
Yes.
Tim Moore Show.
The Tim Moore Podcast.
What would you talk about?
Formerly known as the X Podcast. Well, I was going to talk about my book that I wrote here and how good it is.
It's got your last name on it.
Yes, it does.
It's a big deal. In the flesh, here it is.
We got Russ's book finally.
The Wilderness of Hope.
The Wilderness of Hope. Fly
Fishing
in
Guide.
America
Yeah,
West.
That was a good joke.
Through all the pain to all the promise. We got a copy of your book.
It's crazy. It's here.
Finally released.
How did
Physical
it feel
copy.
to open that box?
You know, I actually thought I would cry. I did.
You looked like you were about to cry.
Yeah. See what happened? That was actually if you've been following the journey, Tucker filmed me opening it for the second time. The first time I had FaceTime
So
Tucker on
staged.
staff.
Yeah.
But it felt real again. It actually felt more emotional the second time. But the first time, I FaceTimed Tucker, who's on staff, and because he was going to film that moment, and then I didn't realize he would tell his whole team came down, and then basically all our staff came down for that moment.
That's
It's really
cool.
special.
Really cool.
Pretty awesome. So you released the book. We sold a bunch of them here this weekend at our church, this past weekend. Actually, by the
Special
time this
weekend.
comes out, by the time this
Yeah.
comes out,
So
it'll
what
be
have you
the
done to
second weekend, but-
celebrate, though? Let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, it's been weird because I haven't known what to plan or what to do. I mean, the day before it came out online, we had rushed a shipment here, and that night I had several people ask me, "What are you doing tonight to celebrate?" And I was like, "I don't know, but I guess I should do something." This is going to sound probably really depressing to some people, but as busy as the season's been, I went by myself to this little Latin American restaurant that Vanessa from the church has been telling me about. And it's out in Gahanna, and ate a ton of empanadas and had some meal. And then I went and saw the new Bond movie, and it was heaven. It was amazing. I loved it.
What's this Latin American
The
place?
food was?
It's called
or
El
the movie?
Arapaso. It's in Gahanna. It's amazing.
Arapaso.
El Arapaso.
El Paso?
Very nice.
Yes.
Spanish?
So yes, it is. I've been on this endless search for empanadas that are as good as the ones from Argentina. This
Yeah.
one came close. It was
Yeah.
really good.
That's nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
I didn't think the Bond movie was that great.
And then
You said it was
Are
heaven.
you kidding me? That was the best Bond movie they've ever made.
Oh, okay.
Did you like it?
I haven't seen it.
You've got to see it. It's
I
so
haven't
good.
seen
I didn't think it
anymore.
was the best. It was okay. didn't
I
think it was
watch
the
Disney
best.
princess movies. That's what I'm into right now. Yeah.
At least, well, they
What
probably
else should I
wouldn't.
do?
The Jungle
What should I
Cruise
do?
was good.
I don't know, man. I think you did a pretty good job. Empanadas in the movie sounds great,
It was great.
but it's just super proud of you. This
Yeah.
is great.
Appreciate it.
And I know you've been busy.
It's been
There's
insane.
a lot of people have been reaching out and been some pretty cool stories that you've gotten from people already.
Yeah, to anybody listening that's been a part of the journey, I've said it and just on socials, but I've been blown away by the kindness of everybody. It's been overwhelming. So thank you to everybody that's reached out, that's purchased. Shameless plug if you haven't yet. Would love for you to get a copy, give it to someone. It was cool. I was having dinner with somebody last night. I saw one on the kitchen table, and I was like, "Oh, you got the book." It just feels weird. It's still very surreal. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, this is my last one. Just for starters, I grabbed 5 because people around me need hope." And so that was just the stories
So
coming
cool.
back are really,
Yeah.
really encouraging.
That's pretty awesome.
So, like people who run these marathons, right? You get done and they can't wait to run the next one. Some people feel like that, and some people feel like I'm never doing that again. So, are you?
Yeah.
All right. Have you started your next book?
Yeah.
Have you thought about your next book, or are you never ever writing a book again?
So I am somewhere in between because when I had started, I have a list actually on my phone of 10 books I'd like to write before I die. So I definitely want to write another one. But before I really dove into just the nitty gritty of the minutia of the editing process and the book marketing, the promotion, and all the craziness, I was like, oh, I'm just going to do the Stephen King assembly line thing. Start this, put this on the back burner, and while I wait to edit that, I'm going to start my new one. But after going through all this, I think I want to finish the launch strong because they say the first 3 weeks of a book being launched are the most important for predictor of its success. I want to finish the launch strong and rest and reprioritize a few other things for a season and eventually. But right now I'm good. Right now I just I hope this does well. I hope it encourages a ton of people, and I'm going to rest and try to get a little bit of normalcy of routine back.
There's a difference between writing a book and releasing a book.
There is. It sounds obvious, but I never thought about it. The whole time I'm writing it, I never thought about the actual selling and promoting of it, and the launching of it.
Yeah, that's hard. So
That is crazy.
break time.
So it's weird because you mentioned this I think last time, but it's just crazy to think about even a year ago the things that the three of us were talking about, and just to watch some of them.
And we have it
unfold
in our
is-
hands now.
It's crazy.
Physical. So get a copy of Hope for the Wilderness. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
You can.
Wherever books are sold, but get it on Amazon.
Hardback
Amazon.
coming out
Hardback
soon.
coming
Yes.
Probably out by the time you hear
Kindle.
this podcast.
Yes, ebook,
Ebook.
Kindle,
Is it
and
Kindle or ebook?
hardback will be out by the time
Audiobook?
this. So I talked to somebody this morning actually.
Nice.
Talked to a company called Lightburn or something, and I'm looking at hopefully getting an audiobook done by the end of the year.
Yeah.
That's
You should have like a British woman
Should I?
do it. That'd be awesome. There's just something about
Yeah,
I just
for
like
all the
British accents. It
wilderness.
just soothing accent. No.
You don't think my accent?
I think yours
soothing?
is great. I'm just
Okay.
kidding. I listen to a ton of audibles and I always prefer the author.
Yeah.
I always prefer the author. I just feel like one of my favorite things too in audibles, because I listen to a bunch of them, is that when you get authors, and I've seen ones that are written and they change it for audible.
Right, they add little
They
stuff.
add stuff and
Oh,
they
that's
ad
cool.
lib things and they do it and they just not just read it. I always like that. That's my favorite part of them.
Are you going to read your own book for enjoyment, or do you feel like you have the whole thing etched in your head?
You know, there's those moments that you.
I wouldn't want to go back.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time going back and looking at my manuscript now. I want
You-
nothing to do with it.
You'll feel different once it's finally in a format that
Yeah.
you are finally proud of.
Yeah.
And when I was telling you, but all of the moments that I finally allowed myself to annoy my publisher, and I was just very neurotic about spacing and about how I wanted everything. I had to skip a third-party proof, so there are mistakes in it. But the way it turned out, as perfectionistic and self-critical as I am, I'm really, if I can say it this way, I am proud of it.
Yeah.
And so
nice.
when you finally get it in a format that's like how you envisioned, it is weird. I don't know that I'll ever go back and read the whole thing, but I won't lie. I don't know if this is just narcissistic or human, but there's been, there's moments where I'll get up and I have a couple copies on the kitchen table because I want to give them away, and I'm like, you just pick it up and you look through it, and it's a weird feeling. It's
Why
surreal.
are you staring at the forward you wrote while he's talking?
I was
Yeah.
I was looking at something that was just like what
Before-
did I,
I'm like,
what did
you're
I
staring
just
at
do?
your own forward.
Yeah,
Well, there
so
was something I was
if you don't buy it for any other reason, Tim or the fourth, this is really funny. Before you walked in, Hannah was sitting there, and Hannah's like, "Yeah, I read the introduction, the first couple chapters," and he goes, "Did you not read the forward?" And she
No,
goes,
I haven't
"No."
read it yet. I'm like, how do you skip the forward? I don't even get that.
Most
I was
important
offended
part.
by that.
No, it's good
So I
stuff.
sit right here and read it.
So I want to thank both of you guys. So Kevin gifted it 5 million different things, but built the website and helped me with a ton of stuff, some social stuff, but website.
Good.
And you just have been crazy generous with your platform to champion it and celebrate it. And
We're proud of you. It's a big
so,
accomplishment.
means the
for
world.
writing a book, and then I do think that the message in it will help bring hope to people. It's a great book. It's got a lot of great stories, and you're a great writer. So
Thank you.
we're excited for it.
It is
See
fun.
where it goes.
It is fun. I've had a blast. I've never had a friend that's written a book, so it's been awesome. So, speaking about messages that are intended to help people, how was that
an
transition?
interesting segue. That was a
Oh man, today
segue.
today I want to have a conversation, just kind of as a primer, maybe
It's
as a
kinda.
post first
post
week,
primer.
post primer of the previous. Why don't you explain it?
I think you're doing a great job. This
I
is
don't know.
enjoyable. Do it.
I don't know. Oh
No, man, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so you started a new series this weekend. My favorite part of it was the bumpers of it.
Yes,
my kids.
Amazing.
absolutely.
That is my favorite bumper we've ever done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jack watches like it over and over again every night. He goes, "Can I watch that first episode? Can I watch that second episode?"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, for those of you that haven't seen it, you better go watch it. It's my kid being super smart, which he obviously got from his dad or YouTube, either one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a series basically talking about the origins of, how would you put it?
Just origins.
Okay.
Not the origins of. Well, I guess it is.
Yeah.
God,
God,
faith,
faith,
science.
Bible.
Yeah.
You
A
You
lot
should
of
start
that.
like a The Origins of type podcast.
The origins of. Be
Yeah, if
fascinating.
only there was one of those that already exists.
There is. There's a few.
So you're getting ready for this People will be listening to this, not to let the cat out of the bag. People will be listening to this after the first week.
Yep.
But you are right now preparing for the first week.
Yeah. I mean, I finished the first week already. I'm working on the second week.
Okay.
I got a jump start, and I needed it.
You've been preparing for this series for a long time.
Yes, a very long time.
A year and a half?
At least, maybe more than that.
You've been talking about
20
it for a
months.
while.
Yeah. I've been preparing for a very long time. And so it's actually, I'm glad I got a jump start. So the series that you did there helped give me a little bit of space to get a jump start. So, because this second week is kicking my butt.
Really?
So, yeah.
How
I mean,
so?
it's just a lot to figure out how to figure out what to present, what not to present, and how to kind of walk through something. So, but it's been a fun process and something I am personally, I mean, if somebody wasn't like, in a way, passionate about these things, you would never do this. So obviously there's some stuff with science and other things that I've just always loved. And so I love the intersection of faith and science, which is often in many people's minds more like a really awful wreck.
Right.
Is if there's an intersection of faith and science, and then there's a lot of people that believe that they never cross, and they never intersect. And so I like, approaching some things that people maybe don't approach, and doing it with a fresh perspective. I think one of the reasons why, and so I guess you could say Origins is, I'm kind of trying to bring two worlds together, where we're all asking the same questions. I mean, we have sciences because we ask questions. And that's why science exists, to observe, to experiment, to come up with theories, and try to prove hypotheses, things like that. And so you've got, I think, but collectively as humans, we ask these questions. Where did we come from, and how did our universe get here, and is there a God, and how can we know that? And then the last half of it, I'm going to be turning it specifically to Christianity and talking about Jesus, where did he come from, and the claim that he had of divinity, and how is that founded. And then the last week we'll talk about the Bible a little bit, because that's I think a big question. And so I think these are subjects that maybe not everybody but the first few weeks, I think there are subjects everybody asks at some point. How we answer those is drastically different.
It's crazy how everybody has that yearning in their soul, right? Of where do we come from? Why are we here? Even, I've probably discussed it on this podcast before, but that, I've heard Elon Musk talk about it. Why are you so passionate about, multiplanetary exploration? It's,
I will say,
he said to find out the meaning of life. That's what he
yeah,
said.
I think too, some of the things that I've heard Elon Musk and some of the others say, before I kind of really set off for almost 2 years just trying to really deeply explore what, where some of the ideas have come from, they make a lot more sense now. That I think before it would have been easy to write off. Just the idea, like I think Elon Musk has been one that has, the search for extraterrestrial life. That falls in a category for a lot of people of being, it's fictitious. It's kind of like, fantasy. It's kind of all this, but when you kind of dive into the world of science, you actually find where some of the scientists and other people actually, why they believe it, and where they've come from in those.
Was there any part of you that was nervous to go on that search? Like, I feel like for some reason, a lot of people of faith are nervous to really pursue the sciences.
There have been times where I think one of the things that has been helpful was kind of making sure that I am taking in not just from one source or two sources, but a variety of sources and different fields. And I think that's kind of important, because you can easily, some of these writers are very convincing. Richard Dawkins has, his book, The God Delusion. He presents some things, and some of it is just the way they use arguments and things. Sometimes you can.
He's a great logician.
And I think you can do that. People do that in faith too. as a pastor, a preacher, I mean, there are ways, and you kind of present something where there is no other option. And he tends to do that in a lot of his writing and the way he does that. And so I think if you're not aware of that, it could maybe feel like, oh my gosh, this just blew up my world.
There's a proverb. Sorry to interrupt. There's a proverb I always love that I always try to keep in mind. I can't remember what verse it is, but it says, when you first hear an argument, it sounds an argument sounds, however it phrases it, right at first, until you finally hear the other side. It almost uses courtroom language. Yeah, and it is that way, isn't it? In almost anything in life, like when you first hear the argument, it's like, oh my gosh, that's the way. Yeah. Until you actually hear the opposing view. Yeah, there's you can hear some really convincing arguments in certain areas. If you take in the whole collective and understand it, as convincing as that argument was for whatever it could be, whether it's evolutionary biology or whatever, you go over here and then read another argument or read another book, and I've read some by brilliant scientists who will give you a completely different perspective and say, this is why this doesn't even come close to answering that. And so what I found is kind of interesting. If you read enough books in these fields, you'll find that a lot of them write books back and forth at each other. Yeah. So, I mean, literally, I read The Devil's Delusion, which is, by, I think, Berlinski, and as a mathematician, I think, and some other things. And so, again, he's writing that in response to the God delusion. So it kind of goes back and forth. And so you kind of find all of these people who are just, it's kind of funny because in many ways, it's kind of passive aggressive. Some are more aggressive. Some are passive aggressive. I think that book, that was kind of a fun one. The Devil's Delusion. It wasn't passive aggressive. He was just straight up. I mean, he just and he was. It was satirical. It was. Well, it's like Christopher Hitchens had the Blind Watchmaker, and you talked about
Dawkins.
I thought that was Hitchens.
Dawkins.
Because you said there was another one made that was like the deaf shoe designer or something.
Stop. What are you doing? No one's gonna get your comedy. Okay.
Did you guys see that?
That was Richard Dawkins, who wrote The Blind Watchmaker. I read that book.
It'll be a little bit late, but did you guys see that Blue Origin launch today?
Yeah.
No.
It was
William Shatner.
William Shatner, 90 years old. Oldest person going to space.
Original space trek.
Yeah. Captain James T. Kirk going back to space.
It was crazy, though, because he comes down and they had cameras
you saw
there.
the whole thing, like up and
well,
they'd already
I kind of had caught it while they were descending. So I didn't even know it was today. So I was like, oh my God, what happened? Did they crash? But it came down.
That's Bezos' project, right? Blue Origin?
Bezos' project. And he came down and they got him like right when they came out of the capsule. They got the cameras there and he's just speechless, and trying to explain what he just experienced and how it just changed his whole perspective of everything. And so it was just really cool to see the wonder in his eyes. And
how far do you go?
The edge of space. They went 100 kilometers, right to the edge, I think.
Yeah, so they have like 4 minutes of weightlessness or something like that, but they're outside the atmosphere or one of the layers of the atmosphere. I can't remember. But fascinating. And there's something about, I'm not saying that space is the only type of science, obviously. I'm just talking about the exploration of our origin and how it all works together, how it makes sense. There's just awe and wonder, because the part that I struggle with as a Christ follower is I just don't know if I could ever understand all of it. And so it's like, why do I even engage in some of it? And so
it's a great question.
That's probably my dilemma.
I think so. So I think that's part of what I consider my job in doing this. And I think that's been a little bit of the challenge is, again, science is not my primary field of study. I mean, I'm a pastor, it's in ministry, it's in the Bible, it's in leadership, it's in those things. And so I enjoy it. I'm fascinated by it. I love learning. So for me, there's been a massive learning curve just because I wanted to really dive into what are some of the arguments for and against, different, basically a theistic and a materialistic viewpoint. And it's been a massive, massive learning curve. Now, most people aren't going to probably care about most of this stuff. What I am hoping to do through this series is to take what I've learned and then repackage it in a way that people can process it.
And why it matters.
And why it matters. And try to put together a little bit of the journey of science and what developments there are, and kind of. I do think that if you follow the last 500 years, really mostly, there's just been an explosion of science, and really more so in the last 100. I mean, you go to the last 100, and it's just insane what we've been able to develop, and technology, which has enabled us to actually discover new things, and I think it's a great field. I love science, but I think it's also a mixture of science. It's a mixture of philosophy. It's a mixture of you have to do all of that when you're talking about really big questions about life. It's not just science. And so I think I can bring a little bit of a perspective that is able to step out of. I think as a scientist, you're stuck in usually most scientists too. You're going to be an expert in a field. So I've read stuff that physicists to biologists, mathematicians, philosopher, chemist, just a variety of different things, and it's just they all have their own. It's got its own unique approach to the same question. Like what is chemistry? What is molecular biology telling us about our origin versus taxonomy? What does that have to do with it? Because it's
like people just doing your taxes, and it's like what does that do to stars?
Right.
Exactly.
Have we always paid 30%?
Right.
Yeah, that version of taxonomy.
Fascinating to see how you're going to interweave all that.
So anyway, we're going to talk about taxes a little bit and stuff. So,
Oh man,
that's hilarious.
but I think it helps because when you are a Christ follower, right, and you encounter people who have these really real questions and real struggles. Like, it may not be my struggle to overcome these hurdles of, how long has the earth been here? Like, I spend about zero time of my life thinking about how long the earth has been here.
Right.
But that's probably just my makeup, right? But a lot of people, that might be their barrier to existing in a way. How about this? It might be their barrier to having an encounter with, the Jesus we say we have an encounter with. And so there's a huge value to it, and not to have all the answers, but to have places to guide people.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you seem like somebody who's tried to talk a couple scientists into faith before. So why don't you share?
Oh yeah,
some?
believe it or not, I don't know if I told you this, and it will be nothing compared to what you've done, but the third or fourth message I did in Lexington was a message about this. We did a whole series on science, and I got family members that are just stupid. Brilliant, and in master's and PhD programs, and I've had a passion for science. When I was I joke about it. When I was in the third grade, I saw the movie Contact for the first time in theaters. Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, and I walked out with just. I think that was the first time I walked out with like the awe of the immensity of the universe and my smallness, but just this wonder and mystery and fascination. And I spent my elementary school years studying astronomy and the stars and the planets, supernovas, and writing. This is my writing nerd side, also writing reports about the different stars and solar systems, and then that blended into my obsession with dinosaurs and all that. But that's a different topic. But then and then you go into Gave My Life to Jesus, and then Lee Strobel, all his books come out, which they have their place. But then then you go into this era where there's like the Four Horsemen of Scientists. I know it was the book by Christopher Hitchens, God Is Not Great. That was his.
Correct.
And him and Dawkins and Sam Harris and all those guys.
Daniel Dennett. Those are the Four Horsemen.
And Daniel Dennett. And then I have family members that some of which who are going into ministry. But they always talk about. I have a family member. He would quote this line from Sleepy Hollow, where the guy is like trying to. He said, "Why can't you just believe?" And he says, "Look," he says, "I am beat down by reason." And I had a family member say, "I feel beat down by reason," and I feel like what I used to believe has been thrown out to the wolves of reason, and there's nothing left. And so I went, especially in Lexington, through dark nights of the soul, just reading science books and going into all that. And I think some people come to the place where and I think this is a little too simplistic. I heard Donald Miller. I remember reading a Donald Miller book about 10 years ago, and I'll never forget. He started a chapter where he goes, I used to do the thing where I would just worry about science. He goes, but then I realized that it stopped being about science a long time ago, and it became about who's smarter than who. And honestly, I don't care.
Yeah.
That's a little too simplistic because there
That's
is
how I feel.
there is such a thing as truth, and And all my rambling to say, though, for me, I think I've come to the place where I'm always going to have an interest in science. And I just think it's fascinating. And I actually think there's a lot of science that can drive us closer to the wonder of the Creator and how detailed He is. And I think there's also parts of science, I think there's also parts of just realizing that, like you talked about, like the reason sciences exist is because people ask questions. I think that's true with a little bit of caveat. I think the reason science exists is because people ask how questions. I think the reason philosophy and spirituality exists is because people ask why questions.
Sure.
And I think it's important in approaching life is to realize that every field can only answer what it's asking.
Right. And geography, because people ask where questions.
Yes. I like that.
Like that.
I like
That's
that.
really-
I like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I think that it'd be fun, and maybe you already mentioned it in the weekend experience or something, but to gather questions, really
Yeah.
to discuss more deeply, like the specific, really just to grill you two as I sit here and give you the questions. But I want to start with a question today. What is is it called a nebulum? What
Nebula?
no, the
Which one?
the like alien type people in the Bible.
Oh, the Nephilim.
Nephilim. That's what it
Listen,
is.
I thought you were getting ready to insult. Did you hear what Demi Lovato said today?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
So let's not insult the extraterrestrials.
Aliens is a derogatory term.
You're talking about, I think, Genesis 6.
Yeah, that's what I was
The
thinking.
Nephilim.
Russ, give me your best Nephilim understanding.
Well, I'll tell you that with a funny story. I preached. This is going to sound really old school, but if you're from a religious background, I preached a revival one time. This is like my first year out of high school. And I don't know why I brought up the Nephilim, but I brought up the Nephilim because there a lot of people think a lot of theologians believe it's the angels came down and had sex with the sons of men, and out of that came this breed called the Nephilim. These like giant, crazy, demonic, have spiritual, have physical type beings. And I don't even know how do you even bring that into a message. But I brought that into a message in the revival service,
and it wasn't even like the main point.
Nope. And let me tell you something. This, if Rick's watching this, if I'm lying, I'm dying. In the middle of my message, when I got done making that point, the pastor of the church stood up. I think it's a little bit more out in the country, old school, and goes, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just have to tell you that is not how I view that story. And there's a lot of different interpretations. I just wanted to say that," and sat down. and I had to continue speaking.
Wait, he
so-
did that in the middle of the
in
message?
the middle of
That's
the
awesome.
message.
That's kind of like when
Oh
Pastor Tim.
gosh, that's intense.
That's
Why
kinda
would
like
you
when-
choose that? Something that's not
don't-
even clear.
I
Kind of
don't
like
know.
when Pastor Tim gives you the eye roll when you're speaking.
Right.
in the crowd.
All the time.
Make a point.
No, I do not. Only when
He
you
gives
misquote scripture
right, a
and when
questioning
you
look.
make something up.
Questioning look to the sky. He's like,
Right.
writes feverishly down.
Or you start doing
a
a verse and he's just mouthing it.
Finish it.
You do that.
Finish it for you.
Are you telling me no? What are you saying?
Yeah.
Stop.
Did you have a question about the Nephilim?
Yeah, what are they? Tell me what
Because you always talk about the
Yeah, he
Nephilim.
just
You have a
did.
tattoo with the Nephilim.
I
on your
do
back.
not.
Yeah.
No one really knows.
Okay.
I mean, it's just not clear. It.
What's your guess?
So there are aliens.
Do you think they're aliens?
Is
did-
the Holy Spirit
I did-
extraterrestrial?
I do believe yes.
No, tell me about that.
Well, what does extraterrestrial mean?
I don't know. You tell me. I haven't read the books.
Well, they're not about aliens, but I mean, I guess in my mind,
You're saying it's
my
out of this
my
world.
my mind, you could consider you could consider God beyond this terrestrial, the earth.
Absolutely.
So to me,
I
that's
thought
the
he was
whole
in
the
all
whole-
things and behind all things.
No,
Okay.
no, they got that
Colossians
wrong.
is wrong.
Colossians 1. You got
Yeah.
that wrong.
So
Doug.
God isn't the universe.
God is not the universe.
So you're saying the universe is telling me to do things.
The universe might be telling you to do
You're
things,
saying
but
that
I don't
God
think
is
it's
love,
God.
but love isn't God.
You are confusing.
Okay.
So I think that the passage on Nephilim is a little, that's just, it's so vague and it's been twisted around. Like, no, it's unclear who the Nephilim were on there. And it just says that when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans, they had children by them. And the Nephilim could have been a group of people, a particular group of people, whether it's where they were from. It's unclear. I don't like to speculate
And this
too
is
much.
pre-flood.
Yes.
So do you believe that there was a flood?
I think there's been evidence that would support that there was massive flooding,
So you think
especially
that-
in that
And
area.
you think that's what affected carbon dating?
So you
No.
believe in the short Earth theory?
Is that what I said?
I don't know. I'm asking.
I don't think that's what I said.
So you don't
I think
believe in
I see.
shorter
So
hair.
here's the
Ken Ham is a heretic.
What do you think about Ken Ham?
So here's
When
my,
you went to the Ark last week,
I
when
have
you-
not been. I haven't been to the Ark.
Okay.
I have not been to see it. I think to that point, I think that is, and that's kind of what I'm trying to speak to a little bit in this series. I think the challenge and the reason why people who get to a point where you mentioned like science or certain things when they're told don't line up with what they've also been told of the Bible or of their faith. When that crossroads happens or an intersection in their life, then that's where people really struggle with doubt, skepticism and I think both sides at times throughout human history have approached it in the wrong way. And I'm talking about that a little bit in this upcoming week. Both faith and science have both done that.
in the upcoming week that you just preached.
No, the upcoming week that I'm going to preach when this airs. So I do think that if one of the challenges that I open up this series talking about is one of the, or at least I hope I do, but one of the problems it may not be what you need to discover, but what you need to be okay with letting go of. And
good.
I like
and
that.
I think that that's for both sides. If you would put these on sides, I don't like to see faith and science as sides. I think that is how that is viewed. There was a poll that was done that said it was something between 50 and 60% of Americans believe that faith and science are at odds with each other.
Right. Well, you
And-
had that whole indoctrination, or the Christians would say of the late '80s, early '90s, right? That schools are trying to teach Big Bang, and that's in opposition. Of
I'm talking about that in
creationism and-
this. I'll be talking about that in week 2, the one coming up. And so
We've
what-
almost been trained, though,
Huh?
by the church and by science to think that they are at odds.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. But a lot of it goes back to what.
The Nephilim.
A lot of it goes back to the Nephilim, and it goes.
What
I think-
week are you
All
talking about the
roads-
Nephilim?
It
all
goes-
roads go back to. You did a series on that?
Yeah, we're saving that for a future series on the Nephilim.
That's Russ's next.
Yes, I'm not touching that one. But when he speaks on it, I'm going to
Nehemiah
stand up
and
in the
Nephilim.
middle of it, and I'm going to go, that's not how I know that story.
His next book.
Right in the
Are-
middle of-
Are you a Nephilim?
A lot of people who have no clue what we're talking about the Nephilim. You're going to
Just
go.
go-
You have
just
to go to
go-
Genesis
just Google
6
the
to
Nephilim.
find
That's
out.
fine.
I do think that it's the way that we hold things that we've been told, and so I do think that within the world of faith, the way you have been taught to read the scriptures or interpret them may stand at odds with some of the things that science has discovered. And so I think, the question is really, are they compatible or are they not? What I've kind of just in my exploration and discovery is that there are multiple ways to view what faith gives us. If you want to just look at in Christian faith, the Bible, there's different ways of interpreting. We've seen that. There's different ways preachers interpret different passages. There's different ways of interpreting that.
Right.
Okay? Same thing with science. There is some scientific evidence that comes out that some things seem more obvious than others, but people basically look at it and go, oh, yeah, I believe that means this. And someone else goes, no, I actually believe that means this. And so I think it's our perspective. It's the way we're interpreting our world. And I do think that there are some traditional things that I was given in understanding of things from my faith that have to do with science that I have probably, I would say, left a little bit, that do not affect my faith in Jesus, do not affect my belief, as we're going to talk through about what I understand about scriptures and all of that. But it really comes down to what the interpretation that was handed down and was given.
Or even understand how the scripture was written, that it was written not primarily as a science book, although God's the one that created everything, if you believe scripture, but it was written to inform humanity on how to engage with God. So when Psalm says that God scattered things to the four corners of the earth, it's not because God's confused in how he made it.
Yeah.
It's that certain parts of scripture were written in poetic language that
Yep.
uses metaphors
Yeah.
and the understanding of the people.
And I think that's a big part. You can look at creation. You can start at the beginning. or you can go all the way to the end, and the church has been debating the book of Revelation.
Right.
Is it literal? Is it figurative? Are we really going to have these scorpion-like feature things with tails that come out and are going to start stinging people?
Or are they really helicopters?
Are they helicopters by Hal Lindsey? Or is it going to be the mark of the beast? Or is it going to be, what is it going to be? That
You really think the helicopter is going to be sent by Lindsey Graham?
Hal Lindsey, stop.
Okay.
Stop. You're confusing people.
Which is more likely? Well, I'm interested to see what week you're talking about this. Who's more likely the Antichrist? Donald Trump, Barack Obama, or Jeff Bezos, or Bill Gates? Or what's more likely the mark of the beast? The vaccine or these phones, or we haven't seen it yet?
What week is all that?
Yeah, that's week 28.
You're going to give us
so that'll be week
firm answer.
28. Yeah, I don't go into all of that. That's not. I have no desire to talk about any of that
But
stuff.
to me, it's like okay. So I remember, I think I told you this on our podcast, but my freshman year of college, went to a Catholic school, and I showed my schedule to my baseball coach because he'd been there for 30 years. So he's like, if you're in a class that, I can get you out of because it's too hard or whatever. Great decision from the coach.
Yeah.
But higher learning. Anyway, I had a theology 1 class, and he's like, you need to get out of that class. I'm like, I'm not getting out of that class. I want to take it. I want to see what this guy's all about.
Yeah.
And he'd been teaching there for 30 years, had a big white beard, and had a packet, and it was a presentation, basically like the syllabus week of the class was him debunking the creationist account of the
Short
world,
Earth.
right? Short Earth, all that,
Theory,
and talking. And so for me, I ended up getting out of the class because it scared me. I think honestly, and it was before I'd had any sort of encounter with Jesus, because I think that so many people come into Christianity as, oh, this is going to make me feel all soft and cozy inside, and we can all hold hands and sing Kumbaya together, and we'll all be in heaven, one day. That's just, and I think people come into it like that and are more afraid, at least this was my experience, even personally, more afraid to think critically because we think that that's doubting.
Yeah.
When I think the more I've walked in this way, critical thinking is probably more like wrestling, right? And less like doubting and unbelief.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
No, I like that because I think there's a shortage of critical thinking in modern Christianity, and it hurts us as people, and then hurts the witness of the church with the world. And I think I heard Dallas Willard is, I think, just brilliant. He's written a ton of books, and he's a great thinker and Christian writer. And someone said they were in a meeting with him one time, and he said, "You do realize that Jesus was never afraid to go where truth took him." And I think like it's when my faith in God is the deepest and the most secure that I actually feel free to explore, because there's nothing that could ever contradict what Jesus created and what he said. And so I shouldn't be afraid of truth just because it might violate orthodoxy
I think
or a traditional way of thinking or viewing things.
I agree. I think the biggest thing that scares people is that, and I think this is what I guess I would tell people to keep in mind, is that don't think that Richard Dawkins has the truth.
Right.
I mean, you could say that for any of them. Ken Ham, you could say, I don't think any one of them necessarily. Like, this is why it's important, I think, to really, I think it's really important to make sure that you are really listening to sources that are going to present evidence for whatever you're kind of wrestling through, but is also going to not do it in a, I want to say in a biased way, but I guess we all do. Like, I mean, Richard Dawkins, and he's going to put stuff out based on what his predetermined end is. This is what we have, and I'm going to do the same thing from my perspective, obviously. And I think it's just important, though, that you take in. I guess what I said before, a variety. Don't just take in one thing.
Right.
Hey, if you want to listen to some of the things I say, that's great. Feel free if you want to go read his book. But I'm going to give you a list of other books and say, go read these as well.
Right.
By other scientists, biologists, just chemists and other things that also say, hey, I've looked at the evidence and this is what I've determined, and here's my argument and why, and that's what most of them are. And so there is a bit of having to kind of figure out, how do I process and how do I work through it? And it's fascinating to me, as I studied a lot of different scientists, how many of them, when new scientific data came out, were so repulsed by the new scientific data that they would just not allow themselves to even go there.
Yeah.
So scientists do that, and so do people of faith. And so I do think that what I have discovered is that some of the traditional views that I was given, that I just held to without asking questions about or questioning some of the traditional views on some of these things, they kind of had a lot of holes in them when you put that. As I began to dive into it, began to realize, wait a minute, there is a whole lot of scientific evidence to me that is just so, it is so blatantly pointing to a creator and a God that I'm like, why are we afraid of talking about the science? It's the interpretation of it. And so a great example I gave, and this, by the time people hear this, is, and I think this works both ways, was in the church back in the 1600s, late 1500s, really. It started with Copernicus, and I told you this when we talked earlier, but, for the longest time, here's a great example of the interpretation. For the longest time, the church had basically adopted this belief that through their interpretation of Scripture, that the earth is the center of our galaxy,
Right.
and that the sun revolves around it. That the sun, God causes the sun to rise in the day and set in the east. That uses different passages that look, we're standing still and the sun is moving.
Right.
And not only from basic observations, but also from passages in Scripture. So you get Copernicus that comes along in the late 1500s, and he kind of now, what's interesting is Copernicus, he puts out his kind of study and his kind of a heliocentric model that the sun is the actual center of our galaxy, and he does that, fortunately for himself, right before he passes away. He does it toward the end of his life. He can't really, you can't incur too much wrath from the church, which really ran everything. And but Galileo, who comes along a little bit later, kind of picks up, and he's doing all kinds of studies and things, and he's basically comes out and and says that, the same thing and agrees to it. Well, Galileo incurs the Roman Inquisition. In 1616, the Roman Inquisition, they basically put him on trial for this, and if he does not choose to recant his beliefs, like, oh, I didn't realize I did that. That was an accident, like, in which he kind of does a little bit, then he could have faced death. Because we all know that what you're presenting in your wicked science is violating what we know to be true.
Right.
So he kind of does recant a little bit. He ends up kind of, I think he got sent to prison for a little bit, and then he gets on, like, what some say house arrest for the rest of his life. And then it's not until 100 years later or so that finally a pope comes out and says, he was right. We are revolving around the sun, and the sun is at the center of our galaxy. Science has proven this, and that's not at odds with what we know to be true in Scripture.
Right.
And so what I want to point out is that has kept and has created a massive divide between faith and science. What is it? It's been some type of narrative that maybe in the world of faith we've held on to, thinking that is truth. And I'm not even talking about who Jesus is and all that. I'm just talking about some things that we've picked up from a single chapter with probably 100, I don't know how many words are in Genesis, I didn't count them, but and like that is our science book, instead of realizing that maybe the way God gave it in Revelation, let's say to Moses, if he's credited for writing that the way God maybe...
John?
No, Moses.
Moses didn't write Revelation.
Genesis. Did I say Revelation? Genesis, sorry, Genesis. The way he would have had that, if you think about it, how God would have had to communicate that to him. I mean, imagine what we know today. Go back thousands and thousands of years to someone who's not even trained in this, and you're going to try to communicate the beginning. It's unfathomable. What are you talking about? You can't do that. And so to me, I kind of relate it, and I kind of mentioned this in the first week, but I kind of relate it to, it's like my daughter, Lauren, when she was asking us, where do babies come from? And it's like, well, they come from the mommy's belly, and it's like, for kids, that's a sufficient answer. When kids get older and they start learning, and they go to health class, and it's like, you told me it was, if you don't tell them ahead of time that there's a little bit more to that, and so I think what I'm trying to say is that there are some things that we need to look at contextually and go, hey, maybe this was given so that we could understand that God was behind it all, and this is what God initiated and did without necessarily saying it has to be the specifics of what are listed in this order. Otherwise, it's not true. And you can look at. So again, that's a theory. I'm not saying that's creationists that hold to a certain version. They're going to deny that. But what I want to show is that there are other theories that Christians, people who love Jesus and believe the truth of the Bible.
What are the four in Driscoll's book?
Oh, I don't know. Well, there's short Earth creationist theories. There's intelligent design, there's theistic evolution, and I don't know if there's a long Earth creation theory.
So basically,
is there a fourth one? I don't remember a fourth one. I know there's three.
A theologian came out with a book on doctrine a while ago that gave basically 4 options of scientific ways to view Genesis and the creation of the world.
Yeah. I don't remember what the fourth one was. I remember 3 of the 4. And so I may in one of the weeks just kind of talk about just very briefly that there's that. And so what I think it is there's space in there. There's space to kind of say, hey, this could mean this. And how does that line up with what we know from science? And
so you're saying what we could have called this series is health class for Christians.
We're not going into biology that much, just one week.
Right.
What about just one week called Never Mind the Nephilim?
Never mind the Nephilim. So, yeah. Anyways, it's going to be, I think if people have questions, one of the things that we're offering for them to do, I'm still figuring out a format because I'm just touching this a little bit, but they can text the word origins to 94,000. And I think if you have friends that have questions and people that I first of all, I'm not an expert in all these areas. I've just done my own study for myself personally and what and so I'm just going to be sharing kind of like my journey through that and what I understand of these. There's definitely people who are far smarter in specific fields than I am, but I also have found you can be really, really smart in the world of physics and miss things completely because you're so entrenched in physics and your preconceived ideas, just like I can in certain things too. And so, I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, that's kind of like my take. I'm not an expert, and I'm not guaranteeing to get everything right, that's for sure. But I'm going to do my best stab at it and walking through where can these things intersect. How can I answer this question, where did the universe come from? What are my options that we have today of a lot of smart people over thousands of years that have come in from Aristotle, who said that the sheer fact that there's a universe demands an explanation. So starting from that, like, what are my options? And we'll talk about that in week 2. What are my options for how I can see that the universe came to be? There's really, in my mind, there's a theistic and a atheistic / materialistic worldview when it comes to that. And we're going to kind of break those two apart and kind of see what each one says and how valid and how do they hold up.
That's good. I'm excited.
It's going to be awesome.
It's never been more
It's going to be
pumped for
very
series.
different. Let me just say this for those who are, so if anybody listens to this podcast after week 1 who's used to going to church, they're going to be a little freaked out.
But you are good at packaging these things in a way that people can understand them in a succinct way.
I will make it so hopefully people will understand. I'm just saying if people who are very used to church and have been going to church for a long time, this is going to, in a few different ways, this is going to confront a sense of traditionalism that you bring, which is, hey, I'm doing this on purpose. So this will be after the first week this podcast comes out. But I'm not using the Bible at all in the first week. So for some, let me just say why, because I'm not probably going to have an opportunity to necessarily say why. Again, we're recording this podcast early, but that's my plan. I've got it done in what I plan on doing. But part of the reason why I wanted to do that is if you're going to ask this question, where did God come from? I want Christians to think when you're having a conversation with somebody who is not, your Bible is not a valid argument.
Right.
Well, my Bible says it,
Yeah.
so that settles it.
It's just circular reasoning.
You know, and it's you can't. I'm just saying. I'm not saying you can't say that. And you might feel that way. And we're going to talk about where did the Bible come from, and what can we trust the Bible? We're going to talk about that in the last week. But what I'm saying is, you can't get into a conversation with somebody who does not believe in God, and say, well, this book is inspired by that God, and it's true, and because of that I believe, and if you don't, then something's wrong with you. I just think that we need to, as a person of faith, I want to be able to have really good, honest, and intelligent conversations with people that don't believe in God, and I want to be able to have an honest conversation with them about things that they're thinking about and talking about. And so I'm kind of intentionally taking that first week to not use any passages from the Bible, to lay out what I think are some very valid reasons for why I believe that God exists. And I think, if anything, if people will open up their mind and their heart a little bit in this series without fear that I'm going to lose something really important and I'm somehow not going to be a Christian and something's going to, through this, because that's not going to happen. That's not my intent. That's not what's happened with my journey. Like, I think if they do and they kind of hold some things that we have, that I'm not saying the most important with a tight fist, but you open up your hands a little bit and say, I think people are going to be surprised that you can actually have a very, very thoughtful conversation with people that maybe don't believe like you do without even invoking the Bible. There's a lot with reason, logic, science that point to it.
I love it.
So it's going to be an interesting. So I wanted to tell people that are like, I will have some passages from the Bible in weeks to come. Okay, I just want to say that because when we get to the last week of it, it's all going to be about the Bible. So I just want to say, like, for those who are freaking out and who are like upset about that, just relax. These first ones, these are not, actually none of these really are what I would call sermons. When we do messages or sermons, they're usually based out of the Bible. All of what I'm doing for this entire series is giving us, like, how do we approach these big questions about God, about faith, and about science. And so there will be stuff from the Bible, but I am not considering these sermons or messages. And that's what people are used to. So I'm throwing that out there for anybody who's freaked out.
And I'm excited for this table to be an extension of those conversations. I think, for the weeks to come. So why don't you do that? If you're listening, you have any questions like I do about the Nephilim, and still don't have answers.
I will not be answering any questions about the Nephilim.
We'll get that. Maybe we can talk to Russ's old pastor, and he can give us better interpretation. So text your questions to Origins.
Text Origins.
To 94,000. And we would love to discuss those more in depth. We'll prepare, these guys will prepare answers for you.
These
and for
guys,
you listening,
I love that.
So I am removing myself from this conversation just to
Maybe we'll
have
even
fun.
address some questions if somebody wants to email into the podcast about this topic.
Yeah, you can do that.
If you do that,
podcast
we'll address them here.
at thex.church, and I'm excited for the next couple weeks to come, so it's going to be really fun.
It is.
Thanks you. Whoa, let me try that again. Thank you all for thanks you all for coming to this episode of the X Podcast. We're so glad that you're here. Everybody who subscribes, likes, follows, shares all these episodes. Oh my gosh, you're the best. And we'll see you for next week.